The dust cloud rose from the horizon like a promise, catching the golden light of a Texas sunset as Nora McAllister stood on the dilapidated porch of what remained of her family's homestead. She squinted against the glare, one hand pressed against the weathered post, the other clutching the foreclosure notice that had arrived just 3 days after they'd laid her father in the hard, packed earth of the Dalhart cemetery. The approaching rider was still just a silhouette, but Nora knew it could only be one person, the bank's representative, coming to claim what little she had left in this world. Dalhart, Texas, 1887, had not been kind to the McAllister family. 3 years of drought had withered their crops and their hopes in equal measure. Her father had borrowed heavily, gambling on rain that never came, and now the debt collector was riding in to claim his due. Nora straightened her faded calico dress, a stubborn pride rising within her despite everything. 22 years old, orphaned and about to be homeless, yet she refused to show the weakness that gnawed at her insides. Her mother had died during the first year of the drought, and her father had followed this past winter, leaving her alone to face the consequences of dreams that had turned to dust. The rider approached, and as he came into focus, Nora realized it wasn't the banker's son she'd expected. This man sat tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders outlined against the darkening sky, a stranger's silhouette cutting through the dust. His horse, a magnificent chestnut with a white blaze down its face, slowed as it approached the gate of the McAllister property. He removed his hat, revealing a shock of dark hair and a face weathered by sun and wind. His eyes, she noted with surprise, were a striking blue, clear as the sky after a storm. "Evening, miss," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the yard. "Name's Xavier Prescott. I was told in town I might find the McAllister place out this way." Nora studied him cautiously. "I'm Nora McAllister. This was my father's farm." Xavier Prescott dismounted with the fluid ease of a man born to the saddle. He approached the gate but didn't open it, respecting the boundary of her property, tenuous as her claim to it might now be. "I'm sorry to hear about your father," he said, his gaze direct but not unkind. "Word travels in small towns. What brings you to Dalhart, Mr. Prescott?" Nora asked, ignoring the sympathy she didn't want and couldn't afford to accept. "I've been hired by the railroad. They're planning to expand the line through these parts, and I'm scouting land." He gestured toward the horizon. "Your property sits on a route they're considering." Nora almost laughed at the bitter irony. "Well, you're a day late, Mr. Prescott. This isn't my property anymore. The bank's taking it tomorrow." Something flickered in his eyes, calculation, perhaps, or curiosity. "Is that so?" He looked past her to the modest house, the barn that leaned slightly to the left, the fallow fields beyond. "Drought got your crops, 3 years running," Nora confirmed, her voice flat. "My father borrowed against the land. I can't pay it back." Xavier nodded slowly, seeming to consider something. "I may have a proposition for you, Miss McAllister, if you're willing to hear it." Suspicion flared instantly. She'd heard propositions before, from men who thought a woman alone was desperate enough for anything. "I'm not interested in the kind of proposition a man usually offers a woman in my situation." To her surprise, Xavier Prescott laughed, a rich sound that seemed to warm the cooling evening air. "No, madam, nothing like that. I'm talking business. The railroad's paying good money for the right land. I could help you negotiate with the bank, maybe save your property and make enough to clear your debts." Nora's heart beat faster despite her determination not to hope. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." "Let's just say I've been where you are," he said, and something in his voice suggested he wasn't merely offering empty words. "Besides, it benefits the railroad if we can make a clean deal without bank complications." I don't have money to pay you, she said warily. We can work out terms later, Xavier replied. For now, may I come in? We can discuss the details, and I'd appreciate a place to water my horse before nightfall. Nora hesitated, weighing her options, which were precisely none. Pride warred with practicality before she finally nodded and unlatched the gate. There's water at the trough, she said, gesturing to the side of the barn. You can see to your horse while I put on some coffee. Xavier led his horse through the gate, and Nora couldn't help but notice how the animal responded to his touch, trusting, calm. She'd always believed you could judge a man by how his horse behaved around him. Inside the house, Nora moved mechanically, building up the fire in the stove and setting the coffee pot to boil. Her mind raced with possibilities and dangers. Could this stranger really help her save the farm? Or was this just another disappointment waiting to crush what little spirit she had left? Xavier appeared in the doorway, his hat in his hands, ducking slightly to enter. The small kitchen seemed to shrink further with his presence. Your father built this place, he asked, looking around at the modest but well-crafted interior. With his own hands, Nora confirmed, a lump forming in her throat. Every board, every nail, Xavier nodded, understanding in his eyes. A man's home is more than just wood and nails. It's all I have left of him, Nora admitted, turning away to hide the sudden shimmer of tears. Of both of them. The coffee pot began to hiss, and she busied herself with cups and the last of her sugar. When she turned back, Xavier had seated himself at the table, a leather portfolio open before him, maps and documents spread out. Come look at this, he invited, and Nora approached cautiously. This is the proposed route for the new line. Your property sits right here. His finger traced a path across the map, stopping directly on what she recognized as her land. The railroad needs a depot in this area, and your location is ideal: flat terrain, good access to the town, enough space for what they need. Hope, dangerous and unwelcome, flickered to life. How much would they pay? Enough to clear your debts and leave you with a stake to start fresh, Xavier said carefully, but we'd have to move quickly. The bank's foreclosure complicates things. Nora poured the coffee with hands that trembled slightly. Mr. Prescott, why are you really doing this? Railroad men aren't known for their charitable inclinations. Xavier accepted the cup she offered, his fingers briefly brushing hers. The honest answer: I get a commission on every land deal I broker. If I can get your property for the railroad instead of letting it go to the bank, I profit too. His honesty was refreshing, and Nora found herself believing him despite her wariness. What would I need to do? For tonight, nothing. In the morning, we'll ride into town together. I'll speak with the banker before he can officially foreclose. With the railroad's backing, I can offer immediate payment that would exceed what they'd get at auction. And then you'd have choices, Miss McAllister, something I suspect has been in short supply lately. Nora studied him across the table, this stranger who had ridden out of nowhere with an offer that seemed too good to be true. Yet there was something about Xavier Prescott that made her want to trust him, a steadiness in his gaze, perhaps, or the way he spoke plainly without embellishment. You can sleep in the barn tonight, she decided abruptly. There's clean straw in the loft. Xavier smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered face. I've slept in worse places, believe me. Later, after he'd gone to the barn, Nora stood in the doorway of her home, watching as the last light faded from the western sky. Stars emerged, bright and distant, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't defined by loss and struggle. She wondered about Xavier Prescott, about the ghosts she'd glimpsed behind his eyes when he spoke of understanding her situation. There was a story there, she was certain. But whether it was one that would bring her salvation or further heartache remained to be seen. With a sigh, Nora closed the door and prepared for bed, knowing tomorrow would bring either a miracle or the final confirmation that some dreams weren't meant to survive in the harsh reality of the Texas Panhandle. Morning arrived with a clarity that only comes after rain, though no rain had fallen. The air felt different somehow as Nora dressed in her best and only good dress, a navy blue cotton that had once belonged to her mother. She twisted her chestnut hair into a knot at the nape of her neck, pinning it securely before studying her reflection in the small mirror above her washstand. A face too thin, eyes too large, skin bronzed by the relentless Texas sun looked back at her. Not beautiful, perhaps, but determined. Today would determine everything. Outside, she found Xavier already awake, grooming his horse with practiced, gentle strokes. He'd shaved, she noticed, and changed his shirt. He looked every bit the respectable businessman, though the gun at his hip reminded her that respectability in the West often required the means to defend it. "You ready for this?" he asked when he spotted her, his eyes taking in her dress with a quick, appreciative glance. "As ready as I'll ever be," Nora replied, moving toward the small shed where her father's old mare was kept. "Penny's not much for looks, but she'll get me to town." Xavier nodded. "I'll saddle her for you." "I can manage," Nora said quickly, unwilling to appear helpless. "I've been doing for myself a long time now." Something like respect flickered in Xavier's eyes. "I don't doubt it, Miss McAllister. But where I come from, a man saddles a lady's horse when they ride together. Call it habit, not judgment." Nora hesitated, then gave a small nod of acceptance. She watched as he moved with quiet efficiency, his hands strong and sure as they adjusted the saddle on Penny's back. The mare, usually skittish with strangers, stood calmly under his touch. The ride into Dalhart took just under an hour, the morning warming steadily as they traveled. Xavier kept the conversation light, speaking of the countryside, the weather, the prospects for rain that everyone hoped for but few truly expected. As they approached the outskirts of town, however, Nora felt her anxiety rising. Dalhart was small enough that everyone knew everyone's business, and the sight of her riding in with a strange man would set tongues wagging before they'd even reached Main Street. "People will talk," she said abruptly, breaking a comfortable silence that had fallen between them. Xavier glanced at her, one eyebrow raised. "People always talk, Miss McAllister. The trick is not giving them anything worth remembering." "Nora," she said impulsively, "if we're to be business partners of a sort, you might as well use my given name." A smile touched his lips. "Nora, then." "And I'm Xavier, or Zav to those who know me well." "I wouldn't presume to know you well, Mr. Prescott," she responded primly, though something warm unfurled in her chest at the implied familiarity. "Not yet," he said simply. And then they were entering the town proper, and there was no more time for personal conversation. Dalhart in 1887 was a town caught between its rough frontier past and aspirations of civilized prosperity. The main street boasted several solid buildings, a hotel, a general store, the bank, a saloon that made a pretense of respectability, while side streets revealed more modest establishments and houses in various states of repair. Nora felt eyes tracking their progress as they rode toward the bank, a stolid brick building that represented both her greatest fear and, potentially, her salvation. She sat straighter in the saddle, chin lifted slightly, refusing to show the trepidation that churned in her stomach. Xavier dismounted first when they reached the bank, then moved to help her down. His hand spanned her waist easily as he lifted her, and for a brief moment she felt the strength in them before her feet touched the ground. She stepped away quickly, flustered by the contact and the unexpected awareness it had sparked. "Let me do the talking," Xavier said quietly as they tied their horses. "At least at first. Banker Morris knows you're in a weak position, but he doesn't know what cards I'm holding." Nora nodded, grateful despite her pride. Negotiating with Harold Morris had always been her father's job, and the banker had made it clear on her previous visits that he considered dealing with a woman both a waste of time and beneath his dignity. Inside, the bank's polished wooden counters and brass fixtures proclaimed its prosperity built in part, Nora knew, on the broken dreams of farmers who had gambled everything on rain that never came. A young clerk looked up as they entered, his eyes widening slightly as he recognized her. "Miss McAllister," he stammered, "Mr. Morris is expecting you, but he wasn't expecting me to bring company," Nora supplied, finding a small measure of satisfaction in the clerk's discomfort. "This is Mr. Xavier Prescott," she continued with more confidence than she felt. "He's here on behalf of the railroad to discuss business with Mr. Morris, business that concerns my property." The clerk blinked, clearly surprised by this development. I'll inform Mr. Morris right away." As the young man scurried toward the office at the back, Xavier leaned slightly toward Nora. "Well done," he murmured, approval evident in his voice. "Always better to unbalance them from the start." Before she could respond, the office door opened and Harold Morris emerged. A corpulent man in his 50s, Morris had the florid complexion of someone who enjoyed his whiskey and his power in equal measure. His small eyes narrowed as he took in the scene before him. "Miss McAllister," he said, voice oily with false sympathy, "I wasn't expecting you until later. The paperwork for the foreclosure isn't quite ready yet." Xavier stepped forward, extending his hand. "Mr. Morris, I'm Xavier Prescott, representative of the Western Expansion Railroad Company. I understand you're in the process of foreclosing on the McAllister property." Morris hesitated, clearly thrown by this unexpected complication. Yes, the McAllister loan is significantly in arrears. We have no choice but to reclaim the property." "I see." Xavier's tone was pleasant but firm. "My company has a strong interest in that particular parcel of land. In fact, I've been authorized to make an immediate cash offer that would cover the outstanding debt and provide Miss McAllister with fair compensation for the property." Morris's expression shifted rapidly from confusion to calculation. "Western Expansion, you say?" "I wasn't aware they had interests in this region." "We keep our plans quiet until necessary," Xavier replied smoothly. "Competition, you understand, but we're prepared to move quickly on this opportunity." A gleam of avarice appeared in Morris's eyes. "Perhaps we should discuss this in my office." "Miss McAllister can wait. Miss McAllister is the current legal owner of the property," Xavier interrupted, his tone hardening slightly. "She'll be part of any discussion regarding its disposition." Nora felt a surge of gratitude, and something more, a warm appreciation for this man who treated her as a person with rights rather than an inconvenient obstacle. Morris frowned but acquiesced with poor grace. "Very well. This way, please." The next hour was a revelation to Nora. She watched as Xavier skillfully negotiated with the banker, using a combination of railroad authority, implied connections to powerful interests, and subtle pressure that occasionally bordered on threats. Morris, initially resistant, gradually became eager as the financial advantages became clear. By the time they emerged from the office, Nora was no longer in debt. The foreclosure had been canceled, replaced by a sale agreement that would provide her with enough money to start fresh elsewhere once the railroad took possession of her land. "You have 2 weeks to vacate the property," Morris informed her as they prepared to leave. unable to entirely hide his disappointment at losing the opportunity to acquire her land at auction. "Mr. Prescott will return with the final payment upon your departure." Outside in the bright sunshine, Nora found herself momentarily speechless. The burden she had carried for so long had been lifted so suddenly that she felt almost weightless, untethered. "Are you all right?" Xavier asked quietly as they untied their horses. "I don't know what to say," Nora admitted. "Thank you seems inadequate." Xavier smiled, the expression reaching his eyes and warming them. "You don't need to say anything, but I would appreciate it if you'd join me for dinner at the hotel. We should celebrate your newfound freedom." Nora hesitated, conscious of appearances. "People will definitely talk if I dine with you in public." "Let them," Xavier replied with a shrug, "unless you're concerned for your reputation." The question hung between them, and Nora realized that for the first time in years, she had the luxury of not caring what others thought. She was no longer the desperate daughter of a failed farmer, trapped by circumstance. She was a woman with options, with a future. Dinner would be lovely, she decided, and the smile that spread across Xavier's face made something flutter in her chest. They spent the remainder of the day in town, with Xavier insisting on buying her supplies she would need for the next 2 weeks. At her protest, he simply said, "Consider it an advance on your payment. The railroad can afford it." By the time they sat down to dinner in the hotel's small dining room that evening, Nora felt as though she had stepped into someone else's life. The weight of imminent disaster had been lifted, replaced by possibilities she had not dared to imagine. "What will you do?" Xavier asked as they waited for their meal. "After the 2 weeks, I mean." Nora considered the question. "I haven't thought beyond surviving each day for so long that it's hard to imagine having choices." "You could go anywhere," Xavier pointed out. "Dallas, San Antonio, even back east if you wanted." "I don't know that I'd fit in those places," Nora admitted. "I'm a farmer's daughter with calloused hands and limited education." "You're more than that," Xavier said with unexpected intensity. "You survived 3 years of drought and personal tragedy without breaking. That kind of strength is rare, Nora." The use of her name, spoken with such conviction, sent warmth spreading through her. "What about you?" she asked, deflecting attention from herself. "What happens after you finish your work here?" Something flickered in Xavier's eyes, a shadow of some old pain quickly masked. "On to the next assignment, I suppose. The railroad's always expanding. No home to return to, not anymore." The words were simple but weighted with unspoken history. Their food arrived then, saving him from elaboration. But Nora found herself increasingly curious about this man who had appeared from nowhere to change her fate. There was depth to him beyond the confident railroad agent. He presented to the world layers of experience that had shaped him into someone who would understand a stranger's desperate circumstances. As they ate, Xavier steered the conversation to lighter topic, stories of his travels, amusing encounters in frontier towns, the changing face of the West as railroads connected previously isolated communities. Nora found herself laughing more than she had in years, drawn out of her shell by his easy charm and genuine interest in her responses. By the time they finished their meal and stepped out into the cool evening air, something had shifted between them. No longer merely a business arrangement, their connection had begun to take on the tentative shape of friendship, with undercurrents neither was quite ready to acknowledge. "I'll see you safely home," Xavier said as they mounted their horses. The ride back to the farm was quiet, both lost in their thoughts as stars appeared above them. When they reached the gate, Xavier dismounted and helped Nora down, his hands lingering slightly longer than necessary at her waist. "Thank you," Nora said softly. not just for the business arrangement, but for treating me like a person with value." Xavier's expression was serious in the moonlight. "You have tremendous value, Nora McAllister. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise." He hesitated, as if wanting to say more, then stepped back. "I should be on my way. I've taken rooms in town, but I'll ride out tomorrow to help you begin preparations for your move." "You don't need to do that," Nora protested. "You've done more than enough already." "Perhaps I want to," Xavier replied simply. "Good night, Nora." As she watched him ride away, Nora felt a curious mixture of emotions: gratitude, hope, and something less definable that made her heart beat faster when she recalled the touch of his hands and the warmth in his blue eyes. 2 days later, Xavier returned as promised. Nora had spent the intervening time sorting through the accumulated possessions of her family's life, deciding what to keep and what to leave behind. It was a bittersweet task, each object weighted with memories. She heard his horse approaching and stepped onto the porch, shading her eyes against the morning sun. There was no denying the lift in her spirits at the sight of him, something she tried to attribute to simple gratitude but suspected ran deeper. "You've been busy," Xavier observed as he dismounted, noting the boxes and trunks arranged on the porch. "There's a lifetime of things to sort through," Nora replied. "I never realized how much we'd accumulated until I had to decide what matters enough to take with me." Xavier nodded, understanding. "It's never easy to leave a home." There was that shadow again in his eyes, and Nora found herself asking, "You've had to do it, haven't you? Leave everything behind?" He was silent for a long moment, and she thought he might not answer. Then he sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "Yes. Once it was, not by choice." Nora waited, sensing there was more he might say if given space. "I had a ranch in Wyoming," Xavier finally continued, his voice measured. "Nothing grand, but it was mine. Built it from nothing, worked it for 5 years. Then a cattle company decided they wanted my water rights." His mouth twisted in a bitter smile. "They made an offer. I refused. After that, things got complicated." "What happened?" Nora asked softly. "Fire," Xavier said, the single word laden with loss. "Middle of the night, my barn, my house, everything gone. They made it look like an accident, but I knew." His eyes met hers, haunted by old fury. "I had nothing left to fight with, no proof, just the clothes on my back and my horse." "I'm so sorry," Nora whispered, understanding now his compassion for her situation. "Did you ever try to rebuild?" Xavier shook his head. "What was the point? They had money connections. I was just one man." He straightened, visibly pushing the memories away. "But that was a long time ago. I learned to make my way differently. The railroad job pays well and I travel light." Nora saw beyond the casual dismissal to the wound that had never fully healed. "Is that why you helped me? Because no one helped you?" His gaze softened as it met hers. "Maybe. Or maybe I just couldn't bear to see another good person crushed by circumstances beyond their control." The honesty in his voice touched something deep within her. Before she could respond, however, Xavier gestured toward the boxes. "Where do we start?" For the next several days, they fell into an unexpected rhythm of collaboration. Xavier rode out each morning from town, spending the day helping Nora sort, pack, and prepare for her departure. They worked well together, anticipating each other's needs, finding an easy balance that felt remarkably natural for two people who had known each other such a short time. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in spectacular colors. These were the moments Nora treasured most: the quiet conversations, the gradual unfolding of their histories, the growing awareness of a connection neither had anticipated. She learned that Xavier was 31, the son of a Missouri farmer who had headed west at 18 seeking his fortune. He'd worked cattle drives, tried his hand at mining, finally settling on the ranch in Wyoming before losing it all. He spoke little of the years immediately after, but Nora sensed they had been dark ones. In turn, she told him of her childhood in Illinois, her parents' decision to seek land in Texas when she was 12, the early years of promise before the drought came. She spoke of her mother's quiet strength, her father's stubborn optimism even as their dreams withered in the relentless sun. "He never stopped believing things would turn around," Nora said one evening, her voice soft with memory. "Even at the end, when he was too sick to get out of bed, he'd talk about what we'd plant when the rains came." Xavier's hand found hers in the gathering twilight, warm and reassuring. "Some dreams are worth holding on to, even against all evidence. And some need to be let go," Nora replied, glancing back at the house that had been her home that she would soon leave forever. Xavier's fingers tightened around hers. "Where will you go, Nora? Have you decided?" She hesitated. In truth, the question had occupied her thoughts constantly, but no answer felt right. "I thought perhaps San Antonio. I have a distant cousin there who might help me find work." "Is that what you want, to work for someone else?" "What choice do I have?" Nora asked, practical as always. "The money from the sale will keep me comfortable for a while, but eventually I'll need an income." Xavier was quiet for a moment, his thumb absently tracing circles on the back of her hand. "You could buy land elsewhere, start fresh where the drought hasn't hit so hard." "Alone?" Nora shook her head. "A woman farming alone isn't practical, and you know it." "You wouldn't have to be alone," Xavier said, so quietly she almost didn't hear him. Nora's heart skipped a beat as his meaning registered. She turned to look at him, finding his blue eyes intent on her face, vulnerability and hope mingled in their depths. "What are you saying, Xavier?" He took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "I'm saying that these past days with you have been the most content I've felt in years. I'm saying that you're remarkable, Nora McAllister, strong and kind and determined in ways that humble me. I'm saying—" He faltered, then pressed on. "I'm saying that if you'd consider it, I'd like to see what might grow between us, somewhere new where we could both start fresh." Nora stared at him, emotions warring within her: hope, fear, disbelief. "We barely know each other." "I know enough," Xavier countered gently. "I know you laugh with your whole being when something truly amuses you. I know you're fiercely loyal to the memory of your parents. I know you work until your hands bleed rather than admit defeat." His voice softened further. "I know that when you look at me, I feel like a better man than I've been in a very long time." Tears pricked at Nora's eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. "Xavier, I have nothing to offer you. My land is sold, my possessions fit in a few trunks, my skills are limited to farming that failed. You have everything I need," Xavier interrupted, his voice rough with emotion. He raised his free hand to her cheek, his touch feather light. "Courage, honesty. A heart that hasn't hardened despite every reason to let it." The tears spilled over then, tracing silver paths down Nora's cheeks. "You can't possibly mean that." "I have never meant anything more," Xavier assured her, his thumb gently brushing away her tears. "I'm not asking for promises, Nora. Just a chance. Come with me to Colorado. There's land for sale near a new railroad junction, good land with reliable water. We could build something there together." "As what?" Nora whispered. "Partners, friends?" Xavier's smile was tender. "As whatever we discover we want to be to each other, given time and freedom to choose." The offer hung between them, breathtaking in its simplicity and its risk. Nora looked into his eyes and saw not just hope but understanding that she might need time, that trust came hard after loss, that some decisions couldn't be rushed. "I need to think," she said finally. "This is unexpected." Xavier nodded, releasing her hand reluctantly. "Of course. Take whatever time you need." Later that night, alone in her bedroom for one of the last times, Nora stood at the window looking out at stars that suddenly seemed full of possibility rather than distant and cold. Xavier's proposal tumbled through her mind, alternately thrilling and terrifying her. To go with him would be a leap of faith unlike any she had ever taken. Yet to refuse might be to turn her back on the first real chance at happiness she'd been offered in years. She thought of her parents, her mother's gentle wisdom, her father's adventurous spirit, and wondered what they would advise. Her mother would counsel caution, she knew, while her father would likely urge her to seize the opportunity with both hands. What should I do? She whispered to their memories, but only the night wind answered, rustling through the cottonwood trees her father had planted when they first arrived. Morning found Nora still uncertain, though she had slept little. She moved through her chores mechanically, jumping when a knock came at the door just after breakfast. Xavier stood on the porch, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Good morning," he said. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," Nora replied, painfully aware of the tension between them. "Would you like coffee, please?" In the kitchen, they moved around each other with the familiarity of their days working together. Yet now each accidental touch, each shared glance carried new weight. Finally, Xavier broke the silence. "Nora, about last night, I've been thinking about Colorado," she interrupted, surprising herself with the words. "Tell me more about this land you mentioned." Relief washed over Xavier's face. "It's in a valley near Pikes Peak. The railroad's building a new line there, connecting to Denver. The soil's rich, there's a creek running through the property, and the growing season is decent despite the elevation." His enthusiasm was palpable. "There's timber for building, game in the hills, and the nearest town is growing fast with the railroad coming." "It sounds promising," Nora admitted. "It could be," Xavier agreed, hope evident in his voice. "I've saved most of what the railroads paid me these past years. Between that and what you'll get from this place, we could buy the land outright, build a proper house, start with a small herd." "A cattle ranch," Xavier nodded. "I learned a lot in Wyoming, made mistakes I won't repeat, and farming between us, we have the knowledge to make it work." The vision he painted was seductive, a fresh start, a partnership based on mutual respect and shared goals, the possibility of something more developing between them. "I'm frightened," Nora admitted, honesty compelling her to voice her deepest fear. "Not of the work or the risk, but of trusting someone else with my future after losing so much." Xavier's expression softened with understanding. "I know, believe me, I do, after the ranch." He shook his head. "I didn't think I'd ever want to put down roots again, let alone suggest someone else share that risk with me." "What changed?" "You," he said simply. "Meeting you, seeing how, despite everything, you still face each day with dignity and determination. It made me want to be worthy of that kind of strength." Nora felt something shift within her, a barrier crumbling that she had built around her heart. "I'm not as strong as you think." "You're stronger," Xavier countered. He hesitated, then reached across the table to take her hand. "Nora, I'm not asking for an answer today. The land in Colorado will still be there in a week or a month. Take the time you need." But Nora found, to her surprise, that she didn't want more time. The past years had been nothing but waiting for rain, waiting for crops to grow, waiting for her father to recover, waiting for the inevitable loss of everything she cared about. She was tired of waiting for life to happen to her. "What if I already know my answer?" she asked quietly. Xavier went very still, his eyes searching hers. "And what answer is that?" Nora took a deep breath, summoning courage she wasn't entirely sure she possessed. "Yes, I'll go with you to Colorado." The joy that transformed Xavier's face was like sunrise breaking over the plain, sudden, radiant, illuminating everything in its path. "You're sure?" "No," Nora admitted with a shaky laugh. "I'm terrified, but I'm more afraid of letting this chance pass by than I am of taking the risk." Xavier rose from his chair and came around the table, kneeling beside her with an earnestness that made her heart race. "I swear to you, Nora McAllister, I will do everything in my power to make sure you never regret this decision." "Don't make promises you can't keep," Nora warned, though her voice was gentle. "Life has a way of appending the best intentions." "Then I'll promise only what I know I can fulfill," Xavier replied. "I promise to be honest with you always. I promise to respect your voice in all decisions that affect us both. I promise to work alongside you, not above you or beneath you." His hand tightened around hers. "And I promise that whatever happens, you won't face it alone." Nora looked into his eyes and saw not blind optimism but clear-eyed determination, a man who had known loss and failure but refused to be defined by them. In that moment, she knew her decision was right, whatever uncertainties lay ahead. "When do we leave?" she asked. Xavier's smile was answer enough. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Nora finished packing what she would take with her, sold or gave away what she couldn't, and said goodbye to the few neighbors who had stood by the McAllisters through the hard times. Xavier arranged for transportation of their belongings, finalized the sale of the property with the railroad, and purchased tickets for their journey to Colorado. They agreed to travel first to Denver, where they would be married by a proper minister, before proceeding to inspect and purchase the land. "Not that I doubt your intentions," Nora had explained when she insisted on this arrangement, "but a woman traveling with a man not her husband invites too many complications." Xavier had readily agreed, his respect for her boundaries only strengthening Nora's growing certainty that she had made the right choice. On their final evening at the farm, they stood together on the porch as the sun set for the last time on Nora's life in Dalhart. The house behind them was eerily empty, echoing with memories and the ghosts of dreams that had withered in the Texas heat. "Are you sad to leave?" Xavier asked, his shoulder brushing hers as they gazed out at the land that had broken her father's heart and nearly crushed her own. "Yes and no," Nora answered truthfully. "This was home for 10 years. My parents are buried here, but it's also where I learned how quickly dreams can turn to dust." Xavier's arm slipped around her waist, a gesture of comfort that felt increasingly natural. "Some dreams do. Others just need different soil to take root." Nora leaned against him, allowing herself to draw strength from his solid presence. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong," she confessed. "For the bank to change its mind, or the railroad to withdraw its offer, or for me to disappear." Xavier suggested gently. Nora flushed, embarrassed by her transparency. "I didn't mean it's all right," Xavier interrupted. "After what you've been through, trust doesn't come easily. I understand that. But I'm not going anywhere, Nora, not without you." The simple declaration settled into the spaces between her doubts, warm and reassuring. Nora turned to face him, finding in his steady gaze all the promises he'd made and more besides. "I believe you," she said, and realized as the words left her lips that they were true. Whatever uncertainties lay ahead, Xavier Prescott was not one of them. His smile was tender as he brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch lingering against her cheek. "May I kiss you, Nora McAllister? Just once before tomorrow changes everything." The request, so formal and yet so intimate, sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. "Yes," she whispered, hardly recognizing her own voice. Xavier leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind. But Nora found herself rising to meet him, drawn by a force as inevitable as gravity. Their lips met softly at first, a gentle exploration that quickly deepened as Nora's hands found their way to his shoulders, and Xavier's arms encircled her waist. It was a kiss of promise and possibility, of endings and beginnings intertwined. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Nora felt as though some fundamental shift had occurred in her understanding of the world. "Tomorrow," Xavier said, his voice husky, "we start our journey." "Tomorrow," Nora agreed. And for the first time in years, the future seemed not a threat but an invitation. They left Dalhart the following morning on the eastbound train, the first leg of a journey that would take them north to Denver and then south to the land that awaited them. Nora sat beside Xavier in the passenger car, watching through the window as the landscape of her past receded, and new vistas opened before them. Her hand rested in his, their fingers intertwined, a physical reminder of the connection that had grown between them with such unexpected speed and strength. Occasionally, Xavier would squeeze gently, as if reassuring himself that she was still there, still committed to their shared adventure. "Tell me more about Colorado," Nora requested as Texas gave way to the Oklahoma territory, the scenery outside gradually changing from the flat, drought-stricken plains she knew to rolling hills dotted with more abundant vegetation. Xavier's face lit with enthusiasm. "It's beautiful country. The mountains rise so high they're capped with snow even in summer. The air is clean and crisp, especially at higher elevations. In the valleys, the grass grows tall and rich, perfect for grazing cattle." "And the winters?" Nora asked practically. "Harsh," Xavier admitted. "We'll need to build solid shelter before the first snow, both for ourselves and for the animals. But the springs and summers make up for it, wildflowers carpeting the meadows, clear streams full of trout, game abundant in the forests." As he spoke, painting pictures with his words of the life they might build together, Nora found herself caught up in his vision. It was so different from the desperate hope her father had clung to, not a gamble against impossible odds, but a plan built on knowledge and experience. "What about you?" Xavier asked when he paused for breath. "What do you hope to find in Colorado?" Nora considered the question seriously. "Peace, I think. A chance to work land that gives back what's put into it. Maybe." She hesitated, then continued softly, "Maybe eventually a family if we're blessed that way." The look Xavier gave her was so full of tenderness that Nora felt her cheeks warm. "I'd like that too," he said quietly. "Very much." The journey to Denver took 3 days, with transfers between railway lines and overnight stays in increasingly substantial towns. Xavier was attentive throughout, ensuring Nora's comfort, respecting her privacy, treating her with a courtesy that earned approving nods from other travelers who assumed they were already married. In Denver, they found the city bustling with the energy of rapid expansion. New buildings rose alongside established businesses. Wagons and carriages crowded the streets, and people from all walks of life mingled in a vibrant demonstration of the West's evolving character. "It's so different from Dalhart," Nora marveled as Xavier escorted her to the hotel where he had reserved separate rooms. "So, alive. The railroad changes everything it touches," Xavier observed. "For better or worse, it brings growth, commerce, opportunity." "And people like us," Nora added, "looking for fresh starts." They were married the next day in a small church near the hotel, with only the minister and his wife as witnesses. Nora wore a new dress of deep blue that Xavier had insisted on buying for her, while he wore a crisp black suit that transformed him from rugged railroad agent to distinguished gentleman. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. the traditional vows taking on profound significance as they were exchanged between two people who had already promised each other far more than conventional words could express. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Xavier leaned down to seal their union with a kiss, Nora felt a sense of rightness that transcended her lingering fears. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Their wedding night was spent in a fine hotel room, the awkwardness of new intimacy gradually giving way to a deeper connection that left them both changed by morning. Nora, who had feared she might feel overwhelmed or uncertain, instead discovered in Xavier's gentle patience and evident adoration a safety she had not known possible between a man and woman. "I never imagined it could be like this," she whispered as they lay together in the pre-dawn darkness, her head resting on his shoulder, his arms holding her securely. Xavier pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Like what? So complete?" Nora struggled to find words for the sense of belonging, of homecoming she had experienced in his embrace. "As if we were meant to find each other, despite everything." "Perhaps we were," Xavier suggested, his voice warm with contentment. "Perhaps all the hardships were just the path leading us to each other." The thought was both comforting and challenging that even the darkest experiences might serve some greater purpose beyond immediate understanding. Nora wasn't sure she fully believed it, but she wanted to, and that felt like a beginning in itself. They spent 2 more days in Denver, purchasing supplies and equipment they would need for their new start. Then, with their belongings loaded onto a specially chartered freight wagon and 2 new horses purchased for their own transportation, they set out for the land that would become their home. The journey south took them through increasingly spectacular scenery, towering mountains, verdant valleys, forests of pine and aspen that shimmered in the late summer breeze. Nora found herself captivated by the landscape, so different from the relentless flatness of the Texas Panhandle. "It's like a painting come to life," she marveled as they crested a rise that revealed a sweeping vista of mountains silhouetted against the western sky. Xavier smiled, clearly pleased by her reaction. "Wait until you see our valley. It's even more beautiful." The hour sent a thrill through Nora, the shared possession, the mutual investment in what lay ahead. For so long, she had carried her burdens alone, responsible only for herself in a world that seemed determined to crush her. Now, suddenly, every decision, every hope, every challenge was halved through sharing. When they finally reached the valley Xavier had described so vividly, Nora understood why he had been so confident in her approval. Nestled between protective mountains, the land stretched in a gentle slope from pine-covered hills to a clear, swift-running creek that bisected the valley floor. Meadows of late summer grass rippled in the breeze, dotted with wildflowers that added splashes of color to the predominantly green landscape. "Oh, Xavier," Nora breathed as they reined in their horses on a rise overlooking the property. "It's perfect." Xavier's expression was a mixture of pride and relief. "You really like it, like it. I love it." Nora's eyes traced the contours of what would become their ranch, already imagining where the house might stand, where cattle would graze, where crops could be planted. "I can see why you were so set on this particular place. The owner's an old man with no heirs," Xavier explained. "He's been looking for someone to take it over who will respect what he's built. I think you and I might fit that description." They rode down into the valley, approaching a modest cabin nestled against the hillside. Smoke rose from the chimney, signaling the owner was in residence. As they drew closer, the door opened, and a white-haired man stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand but not raised, cautious but not immediately hostile. "That'll be far enough until I know your business," he called out, his voice strong despite his evident age. Xavier reined in his horse, motioning for Nora to do the same. "Mr. Hollister, I'm Xavier Prescott. We corresponded about your property." The old man squinted, then lowered his rifle slightly. "Prescott, is it? You're earlier than I expected, and you brought company, I see." "My wife, Nora," Xavier replied, the pride in his voice warming Nora's heart. "We were married in Denver last week." Hollister's weathered face creased in a smile. "Well now, that's fine news. Come on up to the house, both of you. Any man starting married life deserves a proper welcome." The inside of the cabin was surprisingly comfortable, with solid furniture crafted from local timber, walls lined with bookshelves, and an atmosphere of settled contentment. Caleb Hollister, they soon learned, had lived in the valley for nearly 30 years, building his small cattle operation into a modestly successful enterprise before age and the death of his own wife had led him to consider selling. Martha loved this place, he told them as they shared a meal at his table. Said it was a little piece of heaven, tucked away where the world couldn't spoil it. I promised her I wouldn't sell to just anyone. His sharp eyes assessed them both. "Your letters sounded right, Prescott, but I wanted to meet you face to face before deciding." "And now that you have," Xavier asked, Hollister's gaze shifted to Nora. "What do you think of the valley, Mrs. Prescott?" "I think it's the most beautiful place I've ever seen," Nora answered honestly. "And I can understand why your wife loved it so much." Hollister nodded slowly. "You've got honest eyes, both of you, and you understand the land isn't just dirt and trees, it's a living thing that needs respect and care." He reached a decision visibly. "I'll sell to you, and at a fair price. Not just the land, but the cabin, the outbuildings, my small herd, and whatever equipment you find useful." Xavier extended his hand across the table. "Thank you, Mr. Hollister. We'll do our best to be worthy of your trust." The old man's grip was still strong as he sealed the agreement. "See that you do. Martha will be watching, and that woman had opinions about everything, even from beyond the grave." The business was concluded with surprising swiftness. Hollister had already prepared the necessary paperwork, needing only signatures and the payment Xavier had brought. By sunset, the property had officially changed hands, and Caleb Hollister was making preparations to depart for California, where his sister's family had long urged him to join them. "I'll be gone within the week," he told the newlyweds as they stood on the porch watching the stars emerge. "That should give me time to show you the particulars of the place where the best grazing is, which streams run dry in late summer, which neighbors can be trusted, and which can't." "We appreciate that," Xavier said. "And you're welcome to stay longer if you need time to arrange your affairs." Hollister shook his head. "Time to let go. Martha would say I've held on too long as it is." He glanced at Nora. "Young folks should have their privacy to start their life together." The week that followed was a whirlwind of activity. While Hollister guided Xavier through the practical aspects of the ranch's operation, Nora set about making the cabin truly their own. She cleaned and rearranged, unpacked the few precious possessions she had brought from Texas, and gradually transformed the space from a bachelor's quarters to a home for a married couple. In the evenings, the three of them would sit by the fire, with Hollister sharing stories of his years in the valley, tales of harsh winters survived, beautiful springs celebrated, encounters with wildlife both dangerous and awe-inspiring. Nora listened eagerly, absorbing the wisdom embedded in each anecdote, building her understanding of this new place that was now her home. On the morning of Hollister's departure, he presented them with an unexpected gift, a handcrafted chest containing his late wife's collection of seeds. "Martha was a gardener before all else," he explained as Nora opened the chest to reveal dozens of carefully labeled packets. Vegetables, herbs, flowers she brought them from back east, traded for others with the Indians and settlers who passed through. Said a place wasn't truly a home until it had growing things chosen and tended with love. Tears pricked at Nora's eyes as she gently touched the packets, each one representing not just potential growth, but the care of another woman who had loved this valley. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll honor her memory in how I use them." Hollister nodded, seemingly beyond words himself. Then, with minimal ceremony, he mounted his horse, tipped his hat to them both, and rode away from the home he had built, leaving it in their keeping. "Are you all right?" Xavier asked as they watched the old man disappear around a bend in the trail. Nora took a deep breath of the clean mountain air. "Yes, it's just, we've been entrusted with something precious, not just land and buildings, but a life's work." Xavier's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her close against his side. "We won't let him down, or each other," and they didn't. The weeks and months that followed brought challenges, as any new endeavor must, but also a deepening of the bond between them that had begun so unexpectedly in drought-stricken Texas. They worked side by side to prepare for winter, repairing weak spots in the cabin structure, ensuring the barn was sound, laying in supplies of firewood that would see them through the coldest months. Xavier taught Nora about cattle management, while she experimented with Martha Hollister's seeds in a small greenhouse Xavier built for her, preparing for spring planting. Their first snow came in late October, transforming the valley into a wonderland of white that took Nora's breath away. They stood together on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the cold, watching as fat flakes drifted down from a pewter sky. "I've never seen anything so beautiful," Nora marveled, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Xavier's arms tightened around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Nor have I," he murmured, though when she turned to look at him, his eyes were fixed not on the snow but on her face. The winter that followed was indeed harsh, as Xavier had warned, but the cabin was snug, their provisions adequate, and the company, they both agreed, beyond compare. They passed the long evenings reading aloud from Hollister's extensive library, playing chess, and talking about their pasts, their hopes for the future, the thousand small details that compose a life shared. And as the snow deepened outside, so too did their knowledge of each other, not just as partners in work, or even as husband and wife in the physical sense, but as companions on a journey neither had expected to make, but both now treasured beyond measure. Spring arrived with an explosion of color and life that surpassed even Xavier's enthusiastic descriptions. The meadows erupted in wildflowers, the trees burst into leaf, and the creek swelled with snowmelt, musical in its rushing abundance. Nora's greenhouse experiments bore fruit as she transplanted seedlings into newly prepared garden beds, while Xavier attended to the cattle, now increased by several early calves. They worked hard, often falling into bed exhausted as the days lengthened and the demands of the ranch multiplied. But there was joy in the labor, satisfaction in seeing immediate results rather than the creeping failure that had characterized Nora's years in Texas. "I never thought I could be this happy," she confessed one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western mountains in shades of gold and rose. "Even when things are difficult, there's a rightness to it all that I've never felt before." Xavier squeezed her hand, his expression reflective. "I know what you mean. After losing the Wyoming ranch, I thought that part of me, the part that could put down roots, that could believe in building something lasting, had died. But it was just waiting for the right place." His eyes met hers, full of quiet certainty. "For the right person." Summer brought its own rhythms, haying the meadows, moving the cattle to higher pastures, tending the now thriving garden that yielded more produce than two people could possibly consume. Nora began preserving food for the winter ahead, filling the root cellar with jars of vegetables, fruits, and preserves. It was during one such session, as she stood over a steaming pot of blackberry jam, that Nora first felt the flutter deep within her abdomen, a sensation so subtle she might have imagined it, except that it came again, more distinctly, a few moments later. Her hand flew to her stomach, a mixture of wonder and apprehension washing over her. She had suspected for several weeks, but had wanted to be certain before sharing the news with Xavier. Now, with this unmistakable evidence of life growing within her, there could be no more doubt. When Xavier returned from repairing fences that afternoon, he found Nora waiting for him on the porch, her face alight with a radiance that stopped him in his tracks. "What is it?" he asked, climbing the steps with concern and curiosity mingled in his expression. "You look happy," Nora supplied, taking his hands in hers. "Frightened, overwhelmed." She took a deep breath. "Xavier, I'm going to have a baby, our baby." For a moment he stood absolutely still, his face a study in shocked joy. Then, with a whoop that surely echoed to the mountaintops, he lifted her off her feet and spun her in a circle, heedless of propriety or restraint. "A baby," he repeated when he finally set her down, his hands cradling her face with infinite tenderness. "Nora, you've made me the happiest man alive. First by agreeing to come with me, then by becoming my wife, and now this a family of our own." Tears of happiness spilled from Nora's eyes as she leaned into his embrace. "I'm so glad. I was worried you might think it too soon, that we aren't established enough yet." "Never," Xavier assured her, his voice husky with emotion. "This ranch, this life we're building, it's all for the future. What better embodiment of that future than our child?" The months that followed were filled with preparations beyond those required by the changing seasons. Xavier expanded the cabin, adding a proper bedroom for the baby and improving the kitchen to make Nora's work easier. Neighbors from miles around, hearing their news, brought gifts, a handcrafted cradle, tiny garments sewn by women who understood the isolation of ranch life, practical items and tokens of welcome for the newest addition to their small community. Winter returned, harsher than the previous year, with storms that howled around the cabin and temperatures that plunged well below freezing. But inside, warmth prevailed, not just from the well-stocked fireplace, but from the anticipation that grew as Nora's condition became increasingly evident. "What shall we name him?" Xavier asked one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on the prominent curve of Nora's abdomen where their child shifted and turned. "Him," Nora teased. "Are you so certain it's a son?" Xavier grinned in the dim light cast by the banked fire. "Not certain, no. Just a feeling. And if it's a daughter, then she'll be as beautiful and strong as her mother, and I'll be twice blessed." Nora considered, her fingers absently tracing patterns on the back of Xavier's hand. "If it's a boy, perhaps Thomas, after my father. If a girl—" She hesitated, then continued softly, "Martha, for the woman who loved this valley first." Xavier's expression softened with approval. "Perfect choices either way." Their child, a son, as Xavier had predicted, arrived during a late March snowstorm, with the assistance of a neighbor woman who had ridden through the blizzard to answer Xavier's desperate summons. Thomas Caleb Prescott entered the world red-faced and howling, a sound that sent his father to his knees in grateful prayer and brought tears of exhausted joy to his mother's eyes. "He has your determination," Xavier observed as they watched their newborn son sleep in the cradle beside their bed. "And your chin. And your lungs," Nora countered with a tired smile. He'll be calling the cattle home without help by the time he's 2. Life changed with Thomas's arrival, becoming simultaneously more challenging and more rewarding. The demands of the ranch didn't diminish, but now they were balanced against the needs of a growing child who charmed everyone he encountered with his ready smile and curious nature. Xavier proved to be a devoted father, carrying Thomas with him on his shorter rounds of the property, pointing out animals and plants, narrating the work he was doing as if the infant could understand every word. Nora would watch them from the doorway of the cabin, her heart so full it seemed impossible it could contain such abundance of feeling. The years passed, marked by the seasons of nature and the milestones of family life. The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship, expanding gradually as Xavier acquired adjacent properties when they became available. Nora's garden evolved into a small but productive farm operation that supplied not only their table, but also brought income through sales to the growing town that had developed around the railroad junction. Thomas was joined by a sister, Martha, when he was 3, and by another brother, William, 2 years after that. The cabin expanded accordingly, eventually becoming a proper house with separate bedrooms for the children, a spacious kitchen where Nora taught her daughter the skills passed down from her own mother, and a study where Xavier kept the ranch's accounts and corresponded with cattle buyers and suppliers. Through it all, the bond between Nora and Xavier deepened and strengthened, tested by occasional disagreements, by the inevitable hardships of rural life, by moments of fear when illness or accident threatened their happiness, but never broken. Each challenge faced together seemed to reinforce what they had discovered in those first days in Dalhart, that together they possessed everything truly necessary for contentment. On the 15th anniversary of their arrival in the valley, they held a celebration that brought together neighbors, friends, and their now growing children for a day of feasting, music, and shared memories. As twilight descended, Xavier found Nora standing alone on the rise where they had first viewed the property, her gaze taking in the expanded boundaries of their ranch, the healthy cattle grazing in the pastures, the house that glowed with lamplight in the gathering dusk. "Happy?" he asked as he joined her, his arm slipping around her waist in a gesture that had never lost its comfort or its thrill. Nora leaned against him, her head finding its familiar place on his shoulder. "Beyond words. Any regrets about coming here with a man you barely knew, taking such a risk?" Nora looked up at him, at the face that had been her constant companion through joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle. The years had left their mark lines at the corners of his eyes, threads of silver in his dark hair, but the essential Xavier remained unchanged, steadfast, honorable, hers. "Not one," she said with absolute conviction. "You were right, all those years ago." "About what?" Nora smiled, remembering the moment that had changed everything: a dusty porch in Texas, a foreclosure notice, and a stranger's unexpected kindness. "When I told you I had nothing to offer, you said I had everything you needed." Xavier's eyes softened with memory and present happiness. "The truest words I ever spoke." As darkness settled fully over the valley that had become their home, they stood together on the hillside, surrounded by the life they had built from nothing but trust and determination. Above them, stars emerged in a sky clearer than any Nora had known in Texas, each one a point of light in the vast expanse of possibility. "We should go back," Nora said eventually. "The children will be looking for us." Xavier nodded but made no immediate move to leave. "In a minute, I'm just—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I'm memorizing this moment. 15 years ago, I couldn't have imagined standing here with you, with our family, with everything we've built together." "Nor could I," Nora admitted. I was so focused on surviving each day that I couldn't see beyond the next sunrise. And now, Nora turned to face him fully, her hands rising to frame his beloved face. Now I see a lifetime of sunrises with you beside me for each one. Their kiss, there on the hillside with the valley spread below them, was both an affirmation of all they had shared and a promise of all that was yet to come, seasons that would turn, children who would grow, challenges that would arise and be met together. Later, as they walked hand in hand back to the house where their family waited, Nora reflected on the strange alchemy of fate that had brought a railroad agent to a failing farm in Dalhart, Texas, at precisely the moment when a desperate woman needed not just practical help, but the kind of hope that could only come from being truly seen and valued. "I love you, Xavier Prescott," she said as they approached the warm lights of home. "More than I ever thought it possible to love anyone." Xavier's smile was visible even in the darkness, a flash of white teeth and boundless joy. "And I love you, Nora Prescott, more with each passing day." Inside, their children waited. Thomas, now on the cusp of adolescence, Martha, a reflection of her mother's quiet strength, William, still young enough to rush to his father for the traditional welcome home hug. The sounds of their voices, the warmth of the fire in the hearth, the familiar sense of home enveloped the couple as they crossed the threshold together. This, Nora thought as she watched Xavier listening intently to William's excited account of the day's adventures, was what she had found in Colorado: not just escape from drought and debt, not just a partnership of practical convenience, but a completeness she had never dared to imagine in those dark days when all seemed lost. She had come with nothing, or so she had believed. But Xavier had been right. She had possessed everything he needed, everything they both needed to build a life of substance and meaning in this valley that had become the heart of their shared world. And in that knowledge, in that certainty of being exactly where and with whom she was meant to be, Nora McAllister Prescott found a peace that transcended all understanding, and a joy that continued to surprise her with its depth and persistence, even after 15 years of discovering it anew each day.